How could someone who looks so innocent be so evil? Lucy Letby, the baby killer nurse.
Oh no, it can't be Lucy.
It's hard to understand why someone who's given the trust and also been trained to care for vulnerable patients would abuse that trust, would abuse.
It all started between 2015 and 2016, when a former neonatal nurse, Lucy Letby, started murdering innocent newborn babies. Lucy Letby was born on the 4th of January 1990 in Herefordshire, the only child of a finance manager and an accounts clerk. She was educated at Elston School and Hereford Sixth Form College. She had had a very difficult birth herself and was very grateful for being alive to the nurses who would have helped save her life. This had led her to want to be a nurse all her life, and everything that she did was geared towards that ultimate goal of becoming a nurse. Letby pursued her education in nursing at the University of Chester, where she also worked as a student nurse during her 3 years of training, carrying out placements at Liverpool Women's Hospital and the Countess of Chester Hospital. Letby was the first member of her family to study at university and graduated in September 2011. She qualified as a Band 5 nurse in September 2011 and went on to start working full-time at the hospital in January 2012 before qualifying to work with intensive care babies in the spring of 2015. Her workload from that time was predominantly spent looking after the sickest babies on the unit. She also mentored 5 or 6 student nurses and took care of hundreds of newborn babies during 2015 and 2016. In June 2015, a consultant and lead neonatologist at the Countess of Chester Hospital NHS Foundation Trust noticed 4 unexplained collapses that occurred in the same unit. It was observed that Letby had been on shift on each occasion. Also, 3 of these cases resulted in deaths in the same month. The unit's consultants promptly reported these deaths to the Trust's committee responsible for addressing serious incidents. The committee classified the deaths as medication errors. The number of unexplained collapses was particularly abnormal. There had previously been only 2 or 3 deaths a year in the neonatal unit. What was also particularly unusual was that the babies did not respond to resuscitation attempts, as they would be expected to. Usually, babies that had got a heartbeat back would see an improvement in their breathing, but that did not happen in these cases, which was distinctly unusual. A misconception of the later senior investigating officer on the case, Detective Superintendent Paul Hughes, was that sick babies in such a ward for vulnerable patients could collapse at any moment. In fact, baby collapses are usually expected beforehand. On the rare occasions when a collapse is not predicted, a medical explanation can usually be found, unlike in this case. In October 2015, a ward manager conducted her own review, noting that Letby was the only staff member consistently present throughout these incidents of unexplained collapses and deaths. These findings were relayed to the lead neonatologist. Further concerns were voiced to management by the unit's consultants that same month. Concerns were either resisted by the trust executives or ignored. In February 2016, the lead neonatologist, along with other consultants, concluded a thematic review investigating 5 unexplained deaths and collapses within the unit. Their investigation determined that the only common factor in these cases was the presence of Letby. The lead neonatologist communicated the findings via an urgent email to the Trust's medical director, leading to an eventual meeting in May 2016. The executive team deemed it to be coincidental and no substantial action was taken. A doctor who helped catch Lucy Letby and bring her to justice has told ITV News that hospital bosses took 2 years to alert the police despite consultants repeatedly raising concerns. Speaking exclusively to UK editor Paul Brandt, Dr. Ravi Jrm said managers forced him to apologise to the nurse after he told them he suspected she was killing babies. When babies started dying on Lucy Letby's ward, her colleagues never expected to catch a killer, but having saved countless lives in his career, Dr. Ravi Jairam potentially spared many more by stopping her.
What was it like when babies started dying and you couldn't understand why?
I've been a paediatrician since 1992 and I had never in my career seen anything like this. And actually initially there was a feeling of thank goodness Lucy was on, because she's really good in a crisis, she's really good at managing these things. But as time progressed, the thoughts started springing into our heads. Could she be doing something deliberately?
So the thought starts sinking in that there could be a killer on the unit. I mean, that's a big moment.
It's a big moment, and it's a chilling moment. I don't think anybody has a rule book for how you deal with a situation where you're suspecting that somebody's causing deliberate harm to babies on your neonatal unit.
Tell me about the night when you walked in on Lucy Letby standing over the cot of baby K.
That is a night that is etched on my memory and will be in my nightmares forever, to be honest. I was sitting at the desk just outside the room writing notes, and the nurse looking after the baby said she was popping to the delivery suite to go and talk to the parents, and she said, I've left Lucy in there babysitting. Part of me was saying, you better go in and just check everything's okay, because you know what's happened before when Lucy's been on duty. As I walked towards the incubator, I could see on the monitors that the oxygen saturations, which is basically the baby's oxygen levels, were dropping. And they dropped to a level that ordinarily, number one, the alarms would have been going off. But number two, the nurse would have called for help. And Lucy Letby was standing by the top of the incubator. She didn't have her hands in the incubator.
What was she doing then?
Well, she was just standing there. Now, tubes become dislodged, but this was a 25-week gestation baby who wasn't kicking around, who wasn't vigorous. The only possibility was that that tube had to have been dislodged deliberately.
On the 24th of June 2016, following the deaths of 2 triplet babies on that day and the previous day, the lead neonatologist phoned the duty executive demanding that Letby be removed from the unit. The duty executive insisted that Letby was safe to work and that she was happy to take responsibility if anything happened to any more babies under Letby's care. The jury did not reach a verdict in relation to that baby, but 2 more almost died shortly afterward, yet the next month managers told doctors there was no evidence Lucy Letby was causing any harm. She was moved from night to day shifts, but when 2 more babies died and another 2 collapsed in June, this time consultants demanded a meeting with the hospital board, including the then medical director Ian Harvey and then chief executive Tony Chambers, to raise their concerns.
The very first thing that Tony Chambers, the chief executive, said to us, he cogitated for a few seconds and he said, well, I can see how that might be a very convenient explanation for things. And what that says to me is that he'd already decided that wasn't going on and this was us just trying to cover up.
He was trying to blame you, in other words?
I think so. He didn't say it explicitly then. We discussed having CCTV put onto the unit. We discussed her being supervised one-to-one with somebody watching her all the time. And then we heard that Lucy Letby had been moved to the risk and governance department, so she'd been taken off the unit.
Suddenly babies stopped collapsing. By this time, 7 unexpected deaths had taken place within the unit. The belief among these executives was that the indications of Letby's involvement were largely circumstantial, and they suspected certain doctors of embarking on a misguided witch hunt. Moreover, they were concerned about potential harm to the trust's reputation resulting from a police inquiry. Ultimately, they opted against engaging the police. The medical director and chief executive instead organized a review through the Royal College of Pediatrics and Child Health, which was initiated in September 2016. At the same time, the unit's services were scaled back in July 2016, no longer accommodating premature births before the 32-week mark. Such cases were redirected to other hospitals in the northwest of England, such as Alder Hey Children's Hospital. Royal College of Pediatrics and Child Health report concluded that Lucy Letby was an enthusiastic, capable and committed nurse, that there was nothing about her background that was suspicious, and that concerned doctors had been going with gut feeling. Those doctors were summoned to another meeting with executives who now accused them.
We'd bullied her, we'd behaved unprofessionally, we'd behaved in ways that were unbecoming to the profession, and then read out a letter from her, which was a very aggressive letter from her, basically saying, I'm coming back to work and you have to work with me, and I'm going to prove to you that I'm a great nurse and I'm not a killer like you say. And then Tony Chambers finished off by saying, so she's coming back to work, and this is the most chilling thing. I'm drawing a line under this, you will draw a line under this, and if you cross that line there will be consequences for you.
You were asked in court, why didn't you just phone the police if you had concerns? But here is the chief executive of the hospital, your boss, saying if you take any further action there will be consequences for you. You have to draw a line under it. I mean, that must be an impossible position for you to be in.
It's an utterly impossible and a Kafkaesque situation to be in. As well, we were told when we initially raised concerns that if we call the police there'll be blue and white tape everywhere, that's the end of the unit. It would be really bad for the reputation of the trust.
In September 2016, Letby raised a formal grievance about her late June 2016 transfer from clinical duties to the hospital's Risk and Patient Safety Office. This grievance was upheld by the board in January 2017, which determined her removal had been orchestrated by the consultants with no hard evidence. They supported her return to the neonatal unit and offered her a placement at Alder Hey Children's Hospital in Liverpool plus support to develop advanced practice or a master's degree. The medical director also commented in the report that the trust's intention was to protect Lucy Letby from these allegations. The chief executive had met with Letby and her parents on the 22nd of December 2016 to apologize on behalf of the trust and assure them that the doctors who made the allegations would be dealt with. He later ordered the consultants to send a letter of apology to Letby, which they did in February 2017.
Dear Lucy, we would like to apologise for any inappropriate comments that may have been made during this difficult period. We are very sorry for the stress and upset that you have experienced in the last year. Please be reassured that patient safety has been our absolute priority during this difficult time.
Meanwhile, doctors continue to raise concerns, but Ian Harvey replied that there was no smoking gun and Lucy Letby would be returning to the ward just as soon as Dr. J. Ram had said sorry to her face.
It must have been an absolutely surreal experience to be sat across the table in that mediation session from somebody who at this point you're quite sure could well be a killer.
Yes, it was bizarre, and of course to listen to her saying, I'm coming back next week, will you work with me? And of course I was having to say, well, if the trust have deemed that you're coming back to work, I will work with you. Yes, but will you be happy to work with me? I will work with you if you're on shift. Because no, I wasn't happy.
She was just 6 days away from returning to the ward before management finally allowed doctors to meet with the police after yet another review failed to explain all of the deaths.
The very fact that the police, after listening to us for less than 10 minutes, realised that this is something that they had to be involved with, to me speaks volumes. And I could have punched the air.
Do you think the lives of some of those babies could have been saved if management had taken action sooner?
It's a horrible thing to say, but I do genuinely believe that there are 4 or 5 babies who could be going to school now who aren't.
The first suspicious case occurred on the 8th of June 2015. At 8 p.m. a healthy baby boy, a twin, was being cared for in Nursery 1 on the ward, and the designated nurse was Letby. The boy had been handed over to Letby after she started her night shift, with the paediatric registrar having clocked off, and by this point Letby was 30 minutes into her shift. 26 minutes later she called a doctor with the baby's state rapidly deteriorating. The baby died half an hour later, less than 90 minutes into Letby's shift.
Can you remember when you first saw them?
It was just like a sheer elation, happiness.
You remember feeling like a new dad?
Yeah, I was very proud.
The paediatric registrar later testified that when she heard about the death of the child the next day after returning to work, that it was a big surprise, and completely out of the blue and very upsetting. He showed no signs of any problems throughout the day. He was handling well. I had no concerns at all for him or his twin sister. A fellow nurse said that when the baby started deteriorating, she saw Letby standing over the infant's incubator and she originally did not intervene. However, the nurse then did when she realized he was not recovering under Letby's care. Doctors attending the scene said that child A developed an unusual blue and white mottling on his skin after collapsing, which they said they had never seen before. This symptom later occurred in other babies that were believed to have been intentionally injected with air. The day after child A's death, Letby searched for his parents on Facebook. About 28 hours after child A's death, his twin sister, child B, also inexplicably collapsed and had to be resuscitated. After child A's death, the parents had spent the day with child B in the nursery with her, but were persuaded to go and rest before the baby's sudden crash. Tests later showed loops of gas-filled bowel in the child. As a result, it was later concluded that the baby had been injected with air. Letby had fed the baby 25 minutes before their collapse, and the child had the same unusual rash on her skin as first seen on child A only hours earlier, indicating that it had also been injected with air. A few days later, child C, a boy in good condition, died. He suddenly collapsed as soon as another nurse left the nursery. Despite not being the designated nurse for the child, Letby was witnessed standing over his monitor as his alarm sounded when the other nurse came back in. Letby's shift leader had already told her to focus on her designated patient, and the shift leader later testified that she had to keep pulling her away from the family room as child C died. His parents later recalled a nurse they believe was Letby brought a ventilator basket in and said, "Even though their child was not dead, you've said your goodbyes. Do you want me to put him in here?"
After your son had died, what was Lucy Letby doing?
She asked if I would like her to bath him in front of me, so I said yeah. So she bathed him, and then she dressed him a little woolen gown and gave him back to us, and we held him for a little bit longer.
On the 22nd of June 2015, baby girl child D collapsed 3 times in the early hours and died. Those who attempted to save the child noticed the girl's skin had been discolored. A post-mortem X-ray showed a striking line of gas in front of the spine, consistent with air being injected into the bloodstream. A doctor later testified that such a finding could not be explained by natural causes. The mother had noted Letby hovering around the family hours before the baby collapsed. On July 2nd, a doctor raised his concerns over the sudden collapses and deaths. No action was taken against Letby. The suspicious cases stopped for a month. On August 4, 2015, a mother walked into the unit to give her baby boy, child E, his milk, only to find Letby apparently in the process of attacking the child. She found the baby distressed and bleeding from the mouth, with Letby standing nearby, faffing around, not doing anything, and wanting to look busy but not actually doing anything.
Corridor, I could immediately hear crying. I walked into the room, seen it was my boy. He had blood around his mouth. And Lucy was there, but faffing about, not doing anything. I was like, what's the matter with him? Lucy said, oh, don't worry. She has this really calm demeanour about her, and she's, very, very softly spoken. And don't worry, the registrar was coming. She'd already contacted him. He was on his way, and she told me to go back to the ward.
I was trying to reassure my wife that, listen, these people are experts, and if they say there's not a problem, you've got nothing to worry about. And that was the first phone call. Quickly followed up by a second phone call with a midwife saying, you need to get here now. And there was a third phone call telling me, where are you? the priest has been called, and I just knew. I knew at that point, you know, you don't call a priest unless someone's dying.
The boy later died after suffering a fatal bleed, which was believed to have been the cause of death as well as the injection of air. Flecks of blood were found in his vomit. The next evening, Child E's twin brother Child F was being cared for in Nursery 2, the same room in which Letby was looking after another infant. At 1:54 a.m. Child F suffered an unexpected drop in his blood sugar and saw a surge in his heart rate. This child survived, and a blood test later revealed that he had been given an extremely high amount of exogenous pharmaceutical insulin which he had never needed. No baby on the unit had been prescribed insulin at the time, and so there was no reason why the baby should be given it. The insulin was kept in a locked fridge next to a nurse's station.
In the investigation, we were shocked, really to the core, to find that a baby had been injected with insulin. It's another layer of surprise, I suppose, as to the depths that Lucy Letby went to.
Later, at trial, Letby did not contest that the baby had been intentionally injected with insulin, suggesting someone else must have done it. Letby searched for the parents of Child E and F on social media in the following weeks and months. At this point, the lead consultant made his feelings known that he was not happy with Letby working on the unit, but this was dismissed. The 7th of September 2015 was the 100th day of Child G being alive, and the nurses had put up banners and made a cake for her parents to mark the day. On that same day, the child collapsed and did so again on 2 other occasions in the following 3 weeks. After the first collapse, the baby girl was taken to Arrow Park Hospital, but 5 days later she collapsed again, 15 minutes after Letby had been feeding her. The child survived, but is now severely disabled as a result of what happened to her. The baby was witnessed projectile vomiting so massively that it reached the chair next to the cot and canopy, which an attending doctor said he had never witnessed before. Her heart rate and oxygen levels also dropped to unusually low levels. The doctor said that he could not find a natural cause for the drastic vomiting. Later, at trial, an expert witness doctor concluded that the only viable explanation for the baby vomiting so extraordinarily was if she had received far more milk than that allocated down her feeding tube, and that this could not happen accidentally. It was later discovered that Letby had deliberately altered the baby's temperature on her observation chart to make it seem like she was already unwell before she collapsed, and also falsified the time of the baby's collapse to make it seem like it coincided with when a colleague gave the baby a milk feed. A nurse noticed when she arrived after Letby's cry for help after one of the baby girl's collapses that the machine connected to the baby to measure its oxygen saturations and heart rate levels had been turned off. A colleague had also noticed that Child G's initial collapse occurred on the day she was originally due to be born. About 6 weeks after Child G's multiple collapses, on the 23rd of October 2015, Child I died. This was the 4th time the baby girl had collapsed. On the 4th collapse, Letby was found next to her incubator by another nurse. Letby later sent a sympathy card to the baby girl's parents on the day of her funeral, a card which Letby kept photos of on her phone. Letby also wanted to go to the funeral.
There are no words to make this time any easier. Thinking of you today, and always. Sorry I cannot be there to say goodbye.
Twice the baby was found to have excess air in her stomach which had affected her breathing. Before the second collapse, Letby had said to a colleague that Child I looked pale, even though it would have been hard to see from where they were standing in a doorway looking into the darkened nursery. Then, when the designated nurse for the child turned the light on, she saw the girl was not breathing. The child's mother later said Letby smiled as she bathed her dead daughter and offered to take a photo of the dead child. A doctor had seen unusual skin mottling on Child I's skin, and X-rays showed the child had a massively enlarged stomach that was consistent with her having been deliberately injected with air. Letby later searched for Child I's mother on Facebook. Later, on the 23rd of October, the hospital management was alerted to the concerns of the doctors on the unit. They were told to not make a fuss. Staff reviews were carried out which highlighted that Letby was always on duty for the suspicious incidents, and in February 2016 a doctor requested an urgent meeting with executives, but no meeting occurred until May 2016. At 11:26 p.m. on Christmas Day 2015, Letby searched on Facebook for the parents of the twins, Child E and Child F. By April 2016, Letby had been moved to day shifts because of the concerns about her, and the suspicious collapses began occurring in the daytime. On the 9th of April 2016, two twin brothers suffered sudden collapses within hours of each other. Tests found that Child L inexplicably had insulin levels in his blood, at the very top of the scale that the equipment was capable of measuring. Hours later, twin brother Child M's heart rate and breathing suddenly dropped and he nearly died.
This can't be happening. It's almost bang on 24 hours since our other son had died. This just can't be happening. So I went and I sat with him all night. His heart rate was absolutely through the roof, you know. It didn't come down, and I was just like, just come down, you know, and I'm almost trying to will the machine, you know, bring his heart rate down, make it okay.
Experts said that Child M's heart was likely caused by air being injected into his bloodstream. Although he lived, the child suffers from brain damage. It was noted that the collapses of Child L and M occurred in almost identical circumstances to Child E and F. Both were twins, where one was believed to have been injected with insulin and the other with air. Child F had survived his injection of insulin, and it was noted that Child L had been injected with twice the dose of insulin, the suggestion being that Letby had done so to ensure death on this occasion. A month later, Child N nearly died after suffering trauma to the throat. Doctors saw blood and unusual swelling at the back of his throat upon examination. The baby had been heard randomly screaming. Child N's father said he then saw blood spattered around his son's mouth. The final two cases occurred within hours of each other on 23 and the 24th of June 2016. The two children involved were triplets, siblings of each other, and the cases occurred on Letby's first shift back after she had returned from a trip abroad to Ibiza, and after Letby texted a colleague saying she would be back with a bang. Child O, a perfect, healthy baby, was due to be discharged home, but suddenly collapsed on the 23rd of June. When the child initially became unwell, another nurse suggested he be moved to Nursery 1 where the sickest children were treated, but Letby disagreed and the baby subsequently collapsed less than 2 hours later. He recovered, but suffered two further collapses and died almost exactly 3 hours later. The lead consultant noted that the child should have responded better to resuscitation. X-rays on a post-mortem showed he had an abnormal amount of gas in his body and liver damage. After Child O's death, Letby was feeding his triplet brother Baby P, who also was expected to be able to soon go home, but he collapsed after his diaphragm was somehow shattered. Doctors attempted to recover him by preparing him to go to another hospital, and Letby then remarked, "He's not leaving here alive, is he?" The boy soon died. X-rays likewise showed an inexplicable amount of gas inside the baby. These deaths have been described as exceptional, and the tipping point, when the consultants realized that drastic action needed to be taken. A consultant allowed the surviving triplet to be taken to a different hospital by medics who had turned up to take Baby P, who had been expected to live. The consultant said she allowed this after her parents begged for it, as she now felt Letby was a mortal danger to the surviving triplet. Before the second triplet died, Letby had texted a doctor saying she would be watching them both, Child P and the surviving triplet, like a hawk, and said, "I'm okay. Just don't want to be here really. Hoping I may get the new admissions." 3 weeks later, in July 2016, Letby was removed from duty and the suspicious collapses stopped.
You were working on the ward at that time when she carried out her final two murders?
Yeah, so I worked, I'm pretty sure I was on the night before, and then I came back in for a night shift, and the first one had gone in the day. And yeah, I was obviously walking onto the ward with another member of staff, and she quickly rushed over as soon as we got through the door to pull the other member of staff into the kitchen, because she'd been on the night before looking after one of the triplets.
What was she pulling that staff member over for? What did she...
Well, she just wanted to inform her before she arrived onto the ward, I suppose. But yeah, I think for me, just like, there's obviously a camera looking at people coming into the ward, so she was obviously watching. And I think for me, yeah, obviously you know, as a nurse, if I was looking after that baby, I'd have, you know, wanted the politeness of being informed before it being in handover. But I probably would have just let the nurse just get herself together first, and then before the kind of ward meeting, just bring her in and then say this has happened in the day.
Were there any whispers amongst the nurses kind of going, Lucy Letby's always there, why was she on shift again?
Not initially. I think everybody's just a bit shocked and sad for the parents initially. They're the first point of thought, really. I don't think anyone thought about Lucy necessarily.
I think it was about a week later she was then removed from the unit. Tell me, what was the ward like at that point?
You know, there's a couple of select people that were quite supportive of Lucy, and then other people that just, you know, generally just wanted to know what was going on, really.
So would you say it changed the dynamics of the ward?
Yeah, I suppose to a degree, because you'd perhaps have a conversation with a few people on the wall, but then if certain people were on that day or at night, then you wouldn't necessarily mention Lucy, because you don't want to get their backs up.
On the 3rd of July 2018, Letby was arrested by police on suspicion of 8 counts of murder and 6 counts of attempted murder, following a year-long investigation. Letby's home at Chester was searched by police following her arrest. After Letby's arrest, the investigation was widened to include Liverpool Women's Hospital, another location at which Letby had worked. Police have begun looking into Letby's entire career, including at Liverpool Women's Hospital, since her conviction. Letby was bailed on the 6th of July 2018 as the police continued their inquiries. Time had to be taken to review the unexpectedly large amount of document evidence found in Letby's home. In her diaries were found what appeared to be a code of coloured asterisks that marked significant events in the investigation. She was rearrested on the 10th of June 2019 in connection with 8 said murders and 9 said attempted murders of babies, and again on the 10th of November 2020. She was bailed in 2019 as more time was needed to get evidence together to make sure it was as strong as possible before charges could be brought. There were thousands of exhibits in the investigation, 16,571 of which were not even used as evidence, and some of the items were themselves thousands of pages long. The 2019 arrest and bailing had been made as by this time 3 further cases of attempted murder had been identified which investigators needed to question Letby further on, and as Letby had been found to have written extensively about the case on her 2018 arrest, detectives wished to see whether she had written anything further in the year while she was under investigation. The key aspects of the investigation, which has been described as painstaking, were, according to Senior Investigating Officer Paul Hughes, always asking ourselves, who else could it be, if not her, and what else could it be?
How would you describe the crimes of Lucy Letby?
Horrible, horrific, and evil. They are the worst crimes that I've had the displeasure of investigating in 28 and sometime years service. There is no explanation or reason as to why. It's only now when you get to an end, an outcome, that you set back and allow yourself to reflect, and you come to terms with the fact that, you know, you've witnessed evil.
On the 13th of March 2020, Letby was placed on an interim suspension by the Nursing and Midwifery Council. On the 11th of November 2020, Letby was charged with 8 counts of murder and 10 counts of attempted murder. She was denied bail and remanded in police custody. The Crown Prosecution Service were convinced to approve all of the charges Cheshire Constabulary requested against Letby after it reviewed the evidence the force collected against her. Letby denied all 22 charges against her, blaming the deaths on hospital hygiene and staffing levels. Letby's trial began at Manchester Crown Court on the 10th of October 2022 before Mr. Justice Goss. She pleaded not guilty to 7 counts of murder and 15 counts of attempted murder. Letby's parents and the families of the victims attended the trial.
How do you describe Lucy Letby?
Manipulative, without a shadow of a doubt, very cunning. Someone who just betrayed every aspect of the confidence that was put in her by the NHS. By her colleagues.
I interacted with her like I did with the other nurses. She seemed keen. She was fairly conscientious. She was quiet.
I would describe her as a person as being beige. She had a normal friendship group, a family. She had a normal social life, everything you would expect somebody in their 20s to do. She used that normality and the trust that she obtained through that as a cover for the crimes that she committed, which is really hard to put those two things together and accept that somebody had committed those crimes, but also that there isn't something outrageous about them, and that actually she was operating in plain sight because she was so normal.
She was the beneficiary of this confirmation bias. People just could not rationalise how a nurse would be living with that extent of betrayal of the confidence that was placed in her, perverting her skills, weaponising the tools that she used.
It's hard to understand why someone who's given the trust and also been trained to care for vulnerable patients would abuse that trust, would abuse all the responsibility of having vulnerable patients dependent on you and actually try to harm them. I can't begin to imagine why someone would do that, what motives they'd have for doing that.
Parents wanted their identifying information to be protected. The child victims were referred to as Child A to Child Q. Mike and Vicky Whitfield, a couple whose daughter almost died whilst being treated by Lucy Letby, have called on police to widen their investigation to include other suspicious deaths and near-fatal collapses of babies. Mike and his wife Vicky have revealed that their baby suffered a catastrophic lung collapse 3 days after being born prematurely at the Countess of Chester Hospital in November 2013. She only survived because doctors at a second hospital managed to revive her using a procedure that had been tried twice without success at Chester.
My first encounter with her was basically the look. When she was standing over Felicity's cot, I went down at 3 o'clock in the morning I don't know why I went down, I just had a feeling that I needed to go down. I went down, I was walking down towards the NCU unit, and she was standing next to the cot, and she just looked up, stared at me, walked off. I walked towards the cot. At the time, I didn't think anything of her looking and walking away. And then I sat down, and then that's when all hell broke loose, and all the buzzers started going off.
So that's Lucy. Is that the look you saw on that woman's face that night?
Yeah, there was no smile, it was just like that, just a blank expression. And it was just a look up and a walk away. She was the first woman who washed, bathed, put a nappy on my baby. And it just sickens me to the stomach. It was just a blank look, like a glance up. There was no smile, there was no talk. It was just, she was standing there doing whatever she was doing. She just looked up and then she just walked away from the incubator.
And then you said all hell broke loose. So what happened then?
I went over by the incubator, had a little look at Felicity, sat down by the cot, and then buzzers started going off, all alarms and bleepers started going off. A nurse ran over, it wasn't Lucy, I remember that much, that ran over to press the emergency buzzer. And then from that moment, I think I must have just gone into extreme shock because a nurse turned around and said, "Get your husband." And I was just still sat there. I just went numb. And then she turned around and screamed at me. She said, "Get your husband now." And then I jumped up and basically went to call Mike.
When you got there, what was the scene that confronted you?
Carnage.
What were any of the nurses or the doctors saying to you in this panic-stricken moment?
Basically, they turned around and said to us, "She's extremely poorly, her lungs have collapsed, and we suggest that if you want to, you get her blessed now because there's a chance she isn't going to make it." But what was more shocking than anything before all that was the 2 days before this, when she was born, she was breathing for herself. She was on CPAP, she was doing well.
On the 10th of July 2023, after a 9-month trial, the jury was sent to deliberate. Verdicts were returned by the jury on several days starting on the 8th of August, but it was not until the final verdicts were returned on the 18th of August that the verdicts were made public. Letby was found guilty of 7 counts of murder of 7 babies. She killed them by injecting them with air, overfeeding them, poisoning them with insulin and assaulting them with medical tools. She is the most prolific serial killer of children in modern British history. On the 21st of August 2023, Letby was sentenced to life imprisonment with a whole life order, the most severe sentence possible under English law. She is the 4th woman in UK legal history to receive.
Lucy Letby. Over a period of almost 13 months between June 2015 and June 2016, when in your mid-20s and employed as a neonatal nurse in the Countess of Chester Hospital in Chester, with specialist training in intensive care, you murdered 7 babies and attempted to murder 6 others. In the case of one of them, trying on separate occasions 2 weeks apart to murder her. You are now to be sentenced for your crimes. Lucy Letby, on each of the 7 offences of murder and the 7 offences of attempted murder, I sentence you to imprisonment for life. Because the seriousness of your offences is exceptionally high, I direct that the early release provisions do not apply. The order of the court, therefore, is a whole life order on each and every offence, and you will spend the rest of your life in prison.
During Letby's trial, the prosecution suggested several possible motives for the killings, including boredom, that she got a thrill from the events surrounding the deaths, and that she enjoyed playing God.
There were some triggers that were easy to identify. Boredom would be one of them. The need to be at the center of everything that was going on. I've come across many narcissistic defendants prosecuting organized crime for years. But to have somebody as self-centered as she is, I don't think I'd seen that before.
The prosecution told the jury that he was controlling things. She was enjoying what was going on. She was predicting things that she knew was going to happen.
It's almost like a God complex, isn't it? That you have life-making decisions. You have power over life or death. She chose certain people to die and others didn't die. That feeds into her ego in a fairly significant way.
Another possible motivation suggested by the prosecution was that the killings were to gain the attention of a married doctor with whom Letby allegedly had a secret relationship. She had texted this doctor, non-stop, during some night shifts, minutes before attacking babies. He was one of the doctors called when a baby rapidly deteriorated. Letby denied all these suggestions, including the allegation that she had a relationship with the married doctor. Among the notes that were found in Letby's home in police searches were declarations of love for the colleague. Some of the notes read, "I trusted you with everything and loved you. You were my best friend, and please help me."
It's quite possible it's not logical. I mean, her thinking is evil, it's not psychotic. And so if she's craving attention, she's working in a hospital, she wants the attention of the doctor, and he gives it to her. So it's very reinforcing.
The human cost in all of this doesn't matter to her, as long as she gets the attention of the doctor of whom she has a crush on.
So it speaks to her adolescent way of thinking in some ways. She's cunning and calculating and clearly looking for status as well. Maybe she had a fantasy that she might end up with him. All problems solved then. She's got the status, maybe a family, and living with a doctor in a hospital. It's infantile thinking. It's adolescent in its way, but that may well have been part of her mindset.
During her trial, it was noted that Letby broke down for the first time only when this doctor who she allegedly had a crush on gave evidence, and she tried to leave the doc without permission at this point. When questioned why she did this, Letby said she had felt unwell, and when questioned, she claimed she didn't know what "go commando" meant.
She is a dangerous individual. She preys on the trusts of many people to commit these crimes.
The Guardian, in its reporting after the verdict, said that the closest the prosecution had to a confession were post-it notes found in Letby's handbag after her arrest. The notes bore handwritten jottings, one of which read, "I killed them on purpose because I'm not good enough to care for them." During the trial, Letby denied this was a confession and that it was merely a reflection of her mental turmoil written while she was being investigated. The Telegraph also noted, though, that she had also suggested another motivation was her fear of never finding love or having children of her own, writing on the note, "I'll never marry or have children. I'll never know what it's like to have a family." A former detective superintendent, the lead detective on the Beverly Allitt case of the 1990s, said that the amount of parallels between the cases made him think that it's almost as if somebody's read the Allitt book, and that Letby's crimes may have been copycats. Allitt had attacked over a dozen infants in her care while working as a nurse in Grantham, England, and the methods used in the cases were apparently identical, with Allitt having also injected some victims with air and insulin and physically assaulting them. It was believed that Allitt may have been motivated by what was then called Munchausen's by proxy, in which she harmed others to gain attention for herself, and it may be that this also explains Letby's attacks. Criminal psychologist Dominic Wilmot subscribes to this theory, commenting, "She wants to be involved in this case. She actually has the perfect opportunity not to be, right? So we expect most offenders to not want to get caught and to distance themselves from their offending behavior." Beverly Allitt and Lucy Letby seem to be injecting themselves into the inquiry, into the circumstances, so it shows that there's something else going on here. Just like in Letby's case, the hospital in Allitt's case was criticized for its slow speed of response. Fellow criminal psychologist Dr. David Holmes agrees that Letby was motivated by Munchausen's. Criminologist David Wilson agrees that in Letby's case, Letby seemed to have a hero complex. Witnesses had testified that Letby indeed looked for action, saying she found the less non-intensive care of babies boring, and always wanted to be treating the most serious cases in the intensive care unit. According to Wilson, healthcare killers like Letby have already developed the desire to kill before they join the healthcare setting. Speaking on Newsnight, he said, "If you want to kill, of course you are going to identify people who are vulnerable. People whose deaths won't be noticed. And so guess what? The people that serial killers target, by and large, are older people, or they target very, very young people, specifically in a neonatal unit in this case, where again small babies with chronic underlying healthcare where the deaths won't be commented upon or seen as being suspicious."